Hello and welcome back, this is ProTailDev back with another Corrupting Spring Remaster video. This time we're going to be working on the sources, we're going to be adding effects to them, kind of finishing them off, so that we're ready to kind of move on for the next video. So yeah, I mentioned in the last video that after this we'll be working on levels, and I kind of want to pick up the pace with this game, kind of get it done, and so I can move on to another big project, which is the VR. So yeah, I'm going to be going full speed ahead with this project and moving on. This video is going to be a little bit long as well because I just want to get all the effects out there and finished so that the abilities are done. Anyway, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Okay, so to start off with, we want to work on the time effect. So specifically what we're going to have is we're going to be going into our time, our source. But before doing that, we kind of want to make an empty game object because we're going to have that effect in there. So it's just going to be a particle system that I'm going to kind of customize. I'm going to skip through a lot of it because I do play around with this quite a lot to try and get what I want. But here's just a little bit of clips of me kind of choosing what I need. I changed the material to be something a bit different, maybe the stars, but I do change that back later because I don't like it too much. I make sure it's all organized using game objects and make sure that all of the position and scale and things are all set correctly. Just before editing and changing how they are. So I kind of want effects to spread out from the center while the time effect isn't active. So this is like its default state, so there's going to be effects coming off it. And then the first idea was that I would have it while it's affected, while it's currently active, have this like thing coming down on it. So it's sped up there so you can't quite see it, but basically I have a bunch of particles coming out of it, and currently there's like a rotation script on it which I've removed, and then here I am just kind of changing the size of it, the scale, so that it's not too crazy. And with our two effects, basically I come into our script because we want to be able to turn them on and off depending on what state it's in. So I need to get the game object. All I'm going to do is turn them off and on, so set active. So depending on what it's switched to specifically, so once it's on the time, it's going to be the active one is going to be set to true once it's actually turned on. Currently this is just when it's switching, which doesn't work, but it's just a guarantee. So as you can see, it's got a spin on it. There you go, it's coming out. The effects has this like swirling effect on it, which I'm going to remove the continuous rotation soon, which there you go, there I've done it. And what I decided to do is I don't want the rotation on the specific effects, so I bring them out of our game object, and then I want these specific two effects to be into this own game object that doesn't have this continuous rotation. So once that's done, I also add in a point light because we want the lights to actually have an effect on it as well. And then what I want to do is just make sure the positioning is correct. I then create an animation for it. So I want the time animation to kind of jump around like as if it's shifting. Has this kind of wonky broken effect to it when it's active, and when it's I can't remember if it's just in general, I think it's going to be just all the way crazy. I do change it because I think it's too severe and smooth out a little bit more. I had a continuous rotation on I think the effect specifically, so there it is. It's jumping around, hopefully you can see that. Then when you slow it down, it's still jumping, but it's a lot slower, so you can tell it's slowed down. The particle effect, I decided I don't like it, the effect's coming down as if it's rain, when it's active specifically, so I kind of change it into one that has more particles, but is similar to the very first one, which is where particles are just coming out, but it basically just has more. So here we go, this is it, this is what it looks like. This is when it's normal, I think, and then when you can slow it down, you can see it kind of moving around. It's kind of smooth, and it has a few particles, but the idea was that you could definitely tell that it was slowed down, which it is. There's a slight rotation, which is fine, and then I kind of play around with it. I wanted more particles and I want it to be quicker for when it's active. I also make it so that I realized that there was an issue that I'm not setting it true and false correctly in certain place, so when it's disabled or when it deactivates, I want it to disable, set back to the other particle effect, which is the idle effect that I've got. And yeah, I think it looked good. I moved on to the form effect. So the form one was the green one, which allows you to shoot grow beds to allow things to grow. And for this, since it's directly tied to these plants and vines, I wanted vines to be all the way around it. So what I've got here is I've got one vine which is going to be literally all around the surface, kind of moved on ahead here. And as you can see, I'm just repositioning these vines specifically so that they're in the correct position. I do remove the continuous rotation on this one as well, so I'm basically only having the continuous rotation on the origin shot, the source. So basically this one is going to have a different effect. Each one's going to have their own kind of movement to them. So here we go, I'm adding a bunch of different vines, replacing them, making sure they look right, and I've got the continuous rotation there, which I will get rid of, but I'm here just making sure it works, just having a look at how it feels, which looks okay. What I then do is do a little bit of reorganizing for different things, and I move on to this energy effect. So the energy effect is going to have another animation, but it's going to be slightly different as well. This one is going to have a animation where it just scales, so it goes smaller and bigger, smaller and bigger. So I'm just skipping through this, and it's kind of a much more simplistic one, which is why I decided that I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting. And to do that, what I wanted was spheres around it. So in a moment after I've showed this animation of me just making it bigger and smaller, I want to add in a bit more to this, because it's a little bit boring. And so yeah, what I do is add these spheres. Initially I wanted to add trails, but they don't really work very well. I don't think they have the same effect that I wanted. So here I'm having spheres with a nice like glow on them, which I believe will be yellow, and it's basically going to loop around our energy source, kind of like how an atom would have kind of how it would look like with an atom. So that's what I've basically made the design off. So you got these three little balls hovering around our specific energy source, and they're going to be yellow and they're going to be glowing. So this is what it looks like. Very simplistic, animated those three, as well as the source being animated as well. So very simplistic. I also got rid of the continuous rotation for the form effects. So I go back to the form effects. I think it's a little bit boring with its movement, because I want to get rid of the continuous rotation. And after that, I've also made sure that certain things are turned off correctly. And in the form, what I wanted it to kind of compress a little bit and move, as if it's like a bit of a beat to it, as if it's alive. So compresses a little, and it's sped up here, but it's much slower than this. But also I want these spikes, I call them spikes, but the thorns, to actually move as well and grow. So what I did was I animated every single vine to make them move, and I also animated the material so that the colour of the green changes. So there you go, that's what it is at normal speed. So you got the different thorns, the vines changing, and you've also got the scaling and the material colours changing. So here's what I did next. I realised that there was a spawn point issue with the enemies, which must have broke a little bit while back. However, I basically fixed it by just re-adding the spawn points for our new spawn points. This must have been back when we edited these and added the new sphere changes, but that's absolutely fine. We'll come back to this and we'll fix all the others later on in the video. So what we're going to be working on now is we're going to look at how we're shooting. So currently I want it to be able to shoot only one at a time. Later on I'll change this because I want to be able to shoot them all, but what I'm doing here is I'm just making sure that you can only shoot one at a time, because I didn't want it to be too powerful. And all I'm doing is checking to make sure if you can shoot are all true. Once they're all true, you can shoot. Obviously, if any of them have deactivated and set to false, which they do if you shoot one, after a certain amount of time, then you'll be able to shoot another. Moving on to the UI and the code for the recharge. So this is, initially I only had the idea of having one recharge because I was going to only have one shot at a time. So what I'm doing here is it's just a simple float, and it's going to have a total flow. And I've done this many times where I've done something similar with a recharge, which is over time it will change to true or false for a countdown, and when it hits that point of 0, it'll after going down from a certain amount, it'll just reset back to normal. So that's all I'm doing with the recharge, which is just fill amount. So it's just an image using UI, very similar to how I've done it in the past. Just setting the total based on how much the lifetime is when it starts, and it'll change depending on what's being used. I decide though at this point that it would be much easier if I just had individual floats for each one. I would also be able to change it later if I decide to make it public, and I can edit in different scripts. So what I do here is I make sure that I can kind of just play around with it and have them shoot at the same time, because we want to be able to control each. We want to see which each recharge has amount. So we can set individual amounts now at the very top instead. What I do here is I get rid of some of the code that I don't need, because I can put it in our update, and basically I change around a few things to make them. I obviously changed a few names as well, so I need to rename. And since it's going to be 4 specific recharges, and I need to add in 4 specific totals, depending on what type I'm going with, and it's the same for the recharge as well. And for the update script, we need to update what our recharge is every time. So I need 4 different versions of this code, kind of the same thing, but it's kind of just more copy and paste, because there's no point in rewriting all that out. It's very, very similar. The only difference is that the projectiles need to be destroyed at certain times. This is why we deleted the destroy code earlier. And then I'm adding in a countdown bool to determine if it's true or false when we shoot. So when we shoot, a specific one is going to be tracked. It's going to set it to false, or it's going to set it to a different true or false depending on if it's been shot. And then once it's ended, once it's shot, it sets it to true. Once it hits the bottom, it sets it back to false. Once the shot has disappeared or the time is up. So this will just control whether we can shoot again for each one. So very simple, it's really simple code. Hopefully I simplified that as much as possible. Hopefully I explained it well. But it is really straightforward. So once that's done, we change in some code for the enemy collision and the grow bed, because it can be simplified a little bit. And then we start working on the design. So for now, I'm probably going to change. This isn't the final design for the UI. I just put this in as like a placeholder. But we're going to have 4 different orbs with the different names, and basically it's going to fill. It's going to drain the center color based on its current time. So I'm just adding this in to basically make a basic design so that I can track it. I add them into the player where it needs to be recharged, and I add in the time it will take for it to last, for the effect to last, or how long it will take before it's available again. Once that's done, I make sure they're all set correctly at the start, the specific time, which you do anyway. And finally, I get rid of any unnecessary code that I don't need and make sure it's all activated and deactivated at the right time. Quick test, at the moment I can shoot infinitely. That is because the time is based on float, but what I want to do is set it into real-time seconds. So that's what I do, have it drain every few seconds, and there we go, we got a proper time now. You can only shoot at a specific moment, and I have to wait until it's fully recharged. However, I can only shoot 1 at a time at the moment, and I decided that that wasn't that great at this point. I kind of wanted to be able to shoot as many as I want to kind of strategize and use them in unison. So what I decide here is I decide to add an or operator instead of a and. This allows me to just pretty much go straight in and choose whenever I can shoot. So whether one is active or not, I can just shoot. And so there we go. So one of them has to be true before. The reason why it's or and not just nothing is you have to be able, I want you to be able to choose when to shoot, as long as one is available. If none of them are available, you shouldn't be able to shoot. But as long as one is true, you can shoot. And there we go. So we can now shoot, and we have to wait for the timer to go down. This is in real time, sort of. It's a little bit slower than what you'd expect, but it's what I was going for, just to show it off. And so moving on, now we want to go back to the energy projectile freeze on collision. This is basically what it sounds like. So I wanted the energy when it's shot to freeze in place when it hits something, kind of acting as if it's a flare inside something like a cave in a level later on. I want you to be able to shoot onto the wall so it'll stay there for a little bit so you can see. I'm thinking of changing this though. So all I'm doing here is changing the tag so that it'll destroy if it hits an enemy, adding my own custom collision freeze script onto it so that when it hits something it'll freeze in place. So that's the code for it. It's very, very simple. Although I'm thinking of deleting that part, leaving it as a solid object so it can hit things, but I kind of want it to not freeze in place because it's not great. There you go. So the reason why it's moving, by the way, is because the island is going up and down. This is freezing in place, so that works. But I'm probably going to get rid of it, so that's why I only showed it quickly. Next, what I decided to do is I want to turn the player into a prefab. The reason for this is because there's not many changes we make to the player. However, the changes that we do make, I want them to apply to all the players on the other levels. It just makes sense. So what I did is I turned it into a prefab, which of course broke a lot of the player prefabs. Should I say, it broke the players later because I want to change those players into prefabs as well. So what I'm doing here is I'm going into my other levels, and as you can see, there's got a player there. It's not prefab, so I need to get the position, set it back to our prefab when I brought that into the scene, set it into the position that our current player in, and then delete the other previous player, and do that for each one. Now, a lot of the code is actually going to be broken, so you can see me here. I'm adding the recharge UI because each scene has their own recharge UI back into the player prefabs for each scene. This because it's all broken and I need to fix it. Doesn't take long though, it's not a big issue. Same thing for the player hunger bar, which is the spirit bar at the bottom. That needs to be done for each level for every player prefab that's been brought in. So, and I had to do the same thing for player score for all of the different UI. It was mainly the UI that needed to be fixed. Right, finally we come back to this issue with the player spawn points being added back into our list, our array list of enemies, our array list of spawn points that need to be put back in. And I do this for each level. It's just as simply setting the size to 0 and then grabbing all of our spawn points and then putting them back in the array. Simple as. That fixes a lot of the array spawn point issues that we've had, and I do it for every single scene. So that's gonna do it. That was this video. Hopefully that's the player abilities and power-ups finished for the spawn. The only thing I'm going to change is probably the energy. I'm going to make it so that it does hit stuff but it doesn't freeze in place, it can drop around, and that'll allow me to kind of play around with that ability, having it to bounce off walls and things to be able to hold certain locations and platforms that you can't maybe see without it. And we'll kind of probably be looking at levels next. And building out the level a little bit more. There's also an update that's going to be coming out soon where I'll kind of go over what the future plans are, especially with the VR since I've encountered a few problems, and kind of what I have planned for the next few weeks. So keep your eye out for that. This has been ProTailDev, and I'll see you next time.